The workforce, we'll go into a little bit more in depth, but the workforce issues that I'm aware of that we've been working on is a result of a couple of studies that Penn State's been doing with Penn College of Technology through the Marcellus Shale Education and Training Center. And it's a different spin on kind of employment needs than a lot of the economic studies that that are out there. And I'll try to remember to talk a little bit about some of the differences between what we've done and the results that you're seeing from other studies. And if I forget to do that, please ask that and interrupt. The study here directly that I'm talking about was done at the request of the Southwest Pennsylvania oil and gas industry. They wanted to be able to help identify what are the employment needs and the training needs for workers. The workforce development is a major issue for the industry. Them trying to identify workers and find the workers to fill in slots, and so for them to be able to identify what specific career opportunities there are and how many jobs and so on is fairly essential for them as well too. And funding, we got it from a variety of different institutes. The Oil and Gas Industry Partnership is, I don't know if you'd call it an industry group or not. It's under the State Department of Labor and Industry. They have industry clusters where they try to bring the industry within certain areas together to identify training needs and work with the workforce investment boards, or the WIBs. And so, it's oil and gas, but it's not, it is through state government. It's not directly one-on-one with the industry. And the reason, this is kind of a little timeline, the reason we were asked to do this is last year, 2009, with the Central Pennsylvania Workforce Investment Board, we were asked to do an industry needs assessment, kind of workforce needs assessment, and did that for the northern tier counties. The Southwest wanted us to do that again, and there are differences in processing development of Marcellus in the Southwest than in the northern tier. Primarily, the gas in the Southwest is wet gas that requires additional types of processing. Ethane, butane, other kind of products come out of Marcellus in the Southwest that in the northern tier, where we did the study earlier, there aren't those byproducts. There's not that additional need for processing. And so kind of one of the questions was, you did the study elsewhere in the state, but in a place which does require processing, how does that affect overall impacts? And so we started, was it June, and then it was September that we did the final report. The final report is available online, and if you can read msetc.org, you can go online. You can download both the Southwest report I'm talking about here. You can also download the Northern Tier report. We are in the process right now of doing a statewide needs assessment that's similar in design, similar in process, that's funded by the Department of Community and Economic Development. And so we're hoping that it'll be in the winter, we'll have the results from that as well too. When we talk about geography and we talk about the workforce investment boards, Pennsylvania's kind of workforce's training is focused around workforce investment boards or regions. And the study we did before was kind of the northern tier with a little bit of the central thrown in. What we were doing here was the Southwest, but it was primarily in these 5 counties. We left Allegheny County out because there's not that much activity going on immediately in Allegheny County. Plus, it's big enough; it makes it complicated to do to identify. And so far, I don't have a map here of the number of wells being drilled by county, but Westmoreland, Fayette, Washington, these are where most of the activity is going on. There's a little bit in Beaver, and they're leasing in Allegheny, but there's not been a lot of drilling there going on. So that's the area we've looked at. The other thing from an employment standpoint is it's really important to know a workforce needs employment, kind of the time elements associated with development of wells. And so I've got 2 slides here. This is too big to fit on one, and actually it's one of the handouts. For an individual well, what the time span required for developing a well. And the pre-drilling is, you get geology, you got the permitting process, you got the staking of the well up to here. The actual drilling, the drilling pad or the drilling unit is on the well pad for only 30 to 45 days. Fracking generally takes a week or so. So that's the full kind of the development. Once the well is drilled, then there's a post-drilling phase or production phase is the term we use. And there are jobs required during that phase, but there are much fewer than otherwise. And at the end, there's a reclamation phase. The length of time here, no one knows. Geologists here are guessing, we're saying 30 to 50 years. I think Terry Engelder said that potentially could be 100 years for an individual Marcellus well, but we don't have experience yet with shale production here in the Marcellus, and so it's anyone's guess. Or we don't know for sure on that. The other way of looking at labor needs, and I like this graph a lot because I think it illustrates a lot of the challenges, opportunities arising from gas development. This is information out of Wyoming, so the numbers don't apply directly to Marcellus, but the concepts basically do. The red is the number of jobs required during the development phase, during the drilling, during the site pad preparation, the access roads, pipelines, and so on. The kind of bluish is the jobs that are associated with the production phase once the wells are in place, and the green is at the end during the reclamation phase. And the thing to notice with this, and the major concept with this, is during the development phase, there are extremely high labor demands compared to everywhere else. There's a lot of jobs created from a community side. This creates challenges for housing and infrastructure and other issues. Once all the wells are drilled during the production phase, then there are still new jobs, but it's much smaller number of jobs. And so the challenge is to think through from a workforce need is during this phase there's a major need for employment, but at some point that goes away. And whether it's 15, 20 years, 25 years, it depends on the number of rigs and kind of investment in markets. And
I think one of the pieces for this is that, remember, this is not Pennsylvania. This is for the shale play up in Wyoming. And so to look at those dates, I've had people kind of look at this chart and think, oh, it means we're really going to be done with development in 2023. We don't know. We don't have a similar chart, and our play is much bigger than this. And so
the numbers would be different.
If I were going to draw it myself, I would say it's much broader. It's all just extended out, because by the time we get done drilling in what's available in the Marcellus play, there should be a considerable period of time should go by, maybe much longer than this.
Right, and one of the key determinants of both the height of this but also the length is how many drilling rigs. The fewer rigs there are operating at one time, the lower the labor requirements at any one time, because most of the labor requirements are tied to the number of rigs, because that influences the amount of work going on in development. But the fewer the rigs, the more time period would take for the play to be fully explored. And so that's part of the uncertainty. Is we can hear reports, you can talk to the industry about their expectations of how many rigs they're going to use, but that varies from year to year based on market conditions and their planning needs. And so we don't really know what this is, but the time element is something really important to keep in mind. From a methodology, we did a couple. What's going on here? These are Jim's slides. Okay, we did. Not sure why those photos are going to. We did a couple major things. We did key informant interviews with gas companies, and asking them specifically for you to develop a well, to bring it in production. What specific occupations do you need? How many of those occupations? How much time will those individuals spend working on that specific well? And then the other piece that we did, and so that was key informant interviews. We did some other, kind of secondary research with that. But then we also did an online assessment, basically a survey we did of a bunch of companies saying, okay, this is what we found here. Is this is our estimate from the key informant interviews? Are we in the ballpark with that or not? To be able to fine tune a little bit.
And one of the points that's interesting is that they went after these titles, these job titles, and really tried to use the words and the language of the industry, and didn't focus on the job titles that would be SOC codes that we would be familiar with in the world of workforce development, which are the labor and industry definitions, because they often have their own set of problems embedded in them. So that's part of, just an FYI, as you're working through this and you start to look at occupational titles, they'll say, I've never seen those before.
Right, and that's
part of where it comes from, is that first part where they confirm the name, the titles and what those are.
Right. And okay, a couple things. This is the main piece. The assumption behind it is when we're trying to estimate, because the play is in the infancy and we really don't know for sure what's going on, to have just a ballpark estimate of it's going to be this number of jobs is not going to be very accurate. And as we get better information over time, it's not going to be possible to scale those results. And so essentially what we did with this study and the earlier study is we did all the calculations on a per well basis. From year to year, it's from DEP. We're able to find out how many wells are actually being drilled. There are sites we can find out how many drilling rigs are actually active in Pennsylvania, and they change over time. And so by doing the calculations on a per well basis, per mile basis of pipeline, it allows the results to say, okay, if next year it turns out our estimates of the number of wells were over or under what they actually are, you can take the basic results and fine-tune them easily, since it is on that kind of per unit basis. And so that's very much what we've tried to do here. As Jeannette was saying, what we did, and I think you've got a copy of this as a handout, we basically developed a matrix of all the different occupations that we've identified from key informant interviews required to develop a well site during the production phase and the reclamation phase. And essentially this is the survey that was used for the key informant interviews, discussing with folks, okay, how many folks do you have doing project management on a well site, and how many days is that? Seismic crew, how many people is that, and how many days is that typically, and so on, is to be able to do that. And putting this together took a lot of time. It was a lot of background interviews. Some of the talked a little bit earlier about the industry partnerships. There were some meetings we went to that we had an outline of this saying, what are we missing? What are the jobs associated with developing a well that we don't have here currently that we needed to add? And you got the full list there. So then we did the follow-up after we did the key informant interviews. We did an online assessment, kind of feeding that information back to them. The other thing we asked was, given this, what were some of their training needs? What were some of the challenges that they're facing in finding workforce, training workforce? And Jeannette will talk about that a little bit later on. The focus was individual companies as the target of the surveys, not individuals. And so we tried to identify kind of the key person within each company who would know that information and then use them as the target for the invitation to participate in the online. What we like about this approach is, compared to others, is we think it can be much more specific. We're talking at the individual job level, at the level that the industry talks about, rather than, as Jeannette was saying, kind of the broad industrial classification. So it makes it a little bit easier to identify what are the training needs and opportunities related to that. This I think is very important, that by talking to the companies, identifying from them specifically what job requirements or tasks are required for the well, I think we're much more accurate in the assessment of what's needed than most of the economic studies that have been out there, have been using secondary data that are already kind of aggregated, that are relying on kind of implicit relationships in the model, which have assumptions about what the jobs are required and the relationships between those. By asking directly what those relationships are and the exact number of people required, I think allowed us to get a lot more accurate on, okay, specifically how many of each type and what are the jobs there. There are some challenges. This probably isn't the challenge. The geographical location, one of the things that is a weakness of their approach is we can tell you the number of jobs required for a well, but we cannot tell you how many of those jobs need to actually be on site versus elsewhere in Pennsylvania, versus they could be at corporate headquarters in Houston or wherever. And so, the number of jobs specific to the community we can't talk about within these results.
And let me just kind of so I had the opportunity to go on a well visit, and at that well visit, the geologist, who by the way was a very nice lady, spoke and was giving us, she was from Anadarko. And I asked her where she was home based, and she was out of Houston. She had been flown in that day to do this presentation to us. And she's working primarily on the Marcellus shale. That's not an unusual. There were other people from those home offices, those big general contractors is what I would call the big oil companies, who are organizing the different well sites. They often have staff that sit somewhere else, but those are included in this because they still need geologists, whether or not they live here or live in Houston, they still need geologists.
They still need geologists, right.